Good morning. It's Sanctuary Sunday and it's snowing. How much better does it get? That's the greatest ever. Welcome. I'm so glad to see you guys this morning. Welcome to the sanctuary. And I want to talk this morning about lighting candles. How many of you like to light candles at home? How many of you can light the fire by yourself? Ooh, a couple. Okay. That's more of a grown skill, so you've got plenty of time to learn it. No rush. So at this time of the year, it's December, and there are lots of religious traditions that like to light candles at this time of year. Did you know that? Okay. Some knew, some didn't. That's okay. Do y'all know which religion lights this kind of candle? Any idea? They're very pretty little jeweled candle holders called diya. And these are our Hindu neighbors. About a month ago, celebrated Diwali. Yeah? Indian, yeah, mostly Indian. That's right. They celebrated Diwali. They light candles to celebrate the triumph of good over evil, the triumph of knowledge over ignorance. So it's the idea that humans can get better all the time if we try. And that's something we can all get down with, right? What about this one? Well, okay. Maybe. German, African. It's a religion, though, not a country. What am I looking for? Okay. Yeah? This is Hanukkah, right? This is called a Hanukkah, and it's the candles that are lit during the season of Hanukkah by which religious group? Which religion lights? Yeah? Jewish. That's right. Our Jewish neighbors are lighting candles starting tonight. They light their candle at night. What do these candles mean? What do they represent? No? Okay. So the Hanukkah story is from a time when the Jewish people were in trouble and they needed some help, and they believed that through a miracle, they could make their oil lamps last 8 whole days instead of 1. They just had a little bit of oil, but a miracle made the oil last a long time so they could see. And for them, this represents having faith that things are going to turn out okay, right? That's a beautiful reason to light candles. What about this one? Do we know what this one means? Yeah? American. Okay, again, we're looking for a religion. Yes? Oh, that's a good guess. Solstice, it's a good guess. You celebrate solstice and there are 5 candles? Wow, that's really cool. A holiday that's mixed with other holidays. Yeah, I think you're very wise to point that out. That's right. All of these are sort of related to solstice in a way. But this is another religion. This is Christians. Our Christian neighbors start Advent today. And they light candles to welcome a new world. They say that the world that we have, it's pretty good, but bad things happen a lot. And if we gradually, we light one candle this week, and another one next week, and another one next week, we make the light bigger and bigger and bigger, and that represents the birth of a new world where people will be happier, where there will be more justice in the world, right? Where the hungry people will have food to eat, where migrants will be welcomed home. It's a world in which justice prevails. So when you light candles during the holidays, you can also bring light and warmth into your home, and you can also do acts of kindness, and that's a way to sort of let your light shine in the world, right? How many of you think you can do some unusual acts of kindness during the holidays? I love it. That's great. I want you to think about how you can be kind to others during the holidays and let your light shine. Okay, so we're going to sing a new song. It was a rip-roaring success at 9 o'clock. We can do at least as well at 11 o'clock. It's called People Look East. Why would we look east at this time of year? Maybe because the sun rises in the east, right? So that's the returning of the light. Also, oh yeah, thank you. I got so carried away with my hymn, and I forgot about the chalice. We'll get there. It also represents the Magi. Have you ever heard of the Magi coming from the east to bring Jesus gifts? So that's another reason we might look east. All right, before we do People Look East, my very favorite song, we're going to invite the Reinerson family up to light our chalice today. Are you ready? Come on up. It's now or never.
Boy. Symbol of light, symbol of knowledge, symbol of warmth, symbol of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. Asher, no. He's trying to blow it out.
Wonderful job. Thank you. Now I invite you all to rise in body or in spirit, and let's sing together our opening hymn. One of the common misconceptions about Advent is that it is a time of anticipating the birth of Jesus. That's related to Advent, but it's not the central task of Advent. Advent is a time for immersing ourselves in anticipation itself. So many writers have written beautifully about Advent, but the spirit of the season reminds me today of these words by Indian author Arundhati Roy. Another world is possible. Not only possible, she is on her way. Maybe many of us won't be here to greet her, but on a quiet day, if I listen very carefully, I can hear her breathing. We must midwife the new world into being by imagining clearly what she will look like. Those who are hungry shall be filled. Those who are sleepless shall find rest. Those who worry will have their hearts set at ease. Those who are migrating will find their way home. Advent is not a period of passive waiting or marking time. It is a time of active waiting, traditionally a time of fasting, as we search our hearts for how we can make that new world appear. It is a time of making ready for justice and of preparing to shoulder the burden. Let us take time now, and each time we light candles in our home this season, to listen to the breathing, sleeping new world. Let us say welcome to her, and let us ask her what we can do to prepare for her coming. The dawn from on high will break upon us to give light to those who sit in the shadows, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Amen.
Good morning. Welcome, and thank you for braving the elements to get to church this morning. You are undoubtedly the Orthodox Unitarians. In fact, you may want to turn in your name tag so we can write Orthodox on your name tag so you can identify each other more intelligently. Anyway, so we're off to creating a future we can live with. Sounds like an extraordinary task. It's doable. And the author, Fran Peavy, she's a great writer, probably best known as a community organizer, just a lovely person, and you'll get an idea of who she is and what she does, because it's all reflected in this piece of writing I want to share this morning. I'm from Idaho. I don't know if you know what that means, but it's very hard for a person from Idaho to think of cleaning up the Ganges River. When a friend from India asked me to help him clean up the river, well, I knew I had no experience cleaning up rivers. What I did know about was how to build a strategy for social change. When I first went to India, I used strategic questioning. I began by building a series of questions, starting with how the people saw the problem themselves. What do you see when you look at the river? How do you explain the situation with the river to your children? How do you feel about the condition of the river? I listened very carefully to how they explained to themselves what they saw. Essentially, I was looking at their logic as well as their words. I was looking for the cultural wiring around the river. Now, I could not say, oh, I see the river's really polluted. That would be like my saying in a Western context, your mother is a whore. It would be a cultural insult. I had to find out how they explained the pollution to themselves. Now, over and over again, I heard, the river is holy, but she's not pure. We're not taking care of her the way she needs us to. Well, after hearing this reply, I noticed that I started to think less in terms of pollution and more in terms of people not taking care of the river. Now, this shift was an important change of perspective for me. Pollution is an abstraction that avoids addressing the responsibility of the people who are making the mess. It is almost as if the river is to blame for being polluted. Very often, people also said, I see the problem, but others don't. Well, such a response told me what the people I spoke with can and cannot talk about with each other. Often, in a situation such as the Holy Ganges, the symbolic overload is so great that to talk about what you really think may seem sacrilegious or what you really think may seem sacrilegious or crazy to others. I needed to understand their change view, how they expected change to happen, what kind of strategies they had confidence in. In India, no social change can compare to the liberation of their country from the control of the British, and this affects their views on how change happens. When I asked how that change had happened, I heard many strategies for change: fasting, direct action, pressuring civic leaders, citizens' assemblies, marches to the Capitol, stories of change that are embedded in that culture. And these became the strategies they were willing to use now to clean up their holy river. People often told me how impossible it was to clean the river. Rather than assuming it was impossible, I started to think that it was going to take a very long time, and I had better start thinking about the next generation in my questioning. I was already questioning young people, but I added a question for the adults. How are you preparing your children to clean up the river? Everyone I asked said something like, "We are doing nothing to prepare the children to clean the river." Their love of the river, their love for the children, and the void in their answers to that question could not long exist in the same minds. The dissonance was too great. And one afternoon, someone came running into my room and said, "Peavy, come right away. We've got an idea." I found the group gathered and enthusiastically discussing a plan. We're going to have a poster painting contest for the children. We'll have all the students in Benares draw posters about what they see regarding the health of the river. We'll hang the winning posters up at a large musical event. The adults will see what children see and be embarrassed. It was an original idea, and clearly the idea was theirs. Everybody in that room had been asked a question about what the preparation of their children for river cleaning work could be. And could that question have had anything to do with the idea for the poster contest? I believe it did. And because it was their idea, they had enthusiasm around it. People need to come up with their own answers. Questioning can catalyze this process. Don't be disappointed if a great question does not have an answer right away. A powerful question will sit rattling in the mind for days or weeks as the person works on an answer. If the seed is planted, the answer will grow. Questions are alive. Through rain and snow and hail and sleet, announcements will continue to feel complete. You know, there's a bad poetry contest. You know, there really is. My wife tells me I should enter. Couple of important announcements I want to bring to your attention. First, right off the bat, on the 21st, Friday the 21st, we will be, a long tradition of this church, celebrating solstice with a worship service at 6 o'clock and a wonderful dinner following. As long as I can remember, the dinner has always been sold out, and so I urge you to think about getting your tickets now. They are on sale at the RE table, and it's also a fundraiser for our high school kids. We're planning for their trip in the spring to Montgomery, Alabama, for the memorial, which has gone up just in the last short while. And they're going to do a very sophisticated civil rights tour throughout the state of Alabama. So help the kids come celebrate solstice, and we'll have a really, really good time and a good dinner together. And also next Saturday at 2:30, right here in Elliott Hall, our Christmas party. It's open for everyone. It's aimed probably more for younger kids. Come and have a really good time. We're going to be making stuff and eating stuff and singing stuff, and it'll be a good time. I promise. Good time for all. Also want to announce that you'll see during the coffee hour, unless you may have noticed on your way into church, we have some, and we do this every year around this time, we have some special crafts to help some of the social service and social justice projects in Uganda, and the money goes to help the artisans in that country. It's a wonderful opportunity for them and also for us. Beautiful, beautiful items. I really enjoy taking a look at them at after the morning service, the 9 o'clock service. So yeah, have a look, and feel free to support this organization, which helps the artists in Uganda. And final announcement, just a reminder that tonight, Jazz Vespers at 7:30, we will be paying tribute to Sting and the Police. And also, just want to mention that this is the final season of Jazz Vespers, and so not only will the remaining programs be at 7:30, but on the 23rd, which will be our last Jazz Vespers service, we're going to have two services, one at 6 and one at 8. You may have some out-of-town guests. I mean, that's really right. The 23rd is right in the middle of the Christmas hubbub, and you may want to bring your friends as well. So we've got two services for Jazz Vespers, 6 and 8 on Sunday, the 23rd. The offering will now gratefully be received, a chance to greet one another, wish each other a fine good morning, and ask your neighbor, why are you an Orthodox Unitarian? Not help but love Fran Peavy, author of our reading this morning. I admire her greatly, even though she's from Idaho. That's okay. If you can just imagine this, this was not evident in the reading, but she actually has spent so much of her life just sitting on park benches around the world, holding a sign that said, "American willing to listen." How crazy is that? She was not a therapist, but a communications expert. She had no intent on fixing problems other than gaining through what she called dynamic listening. She hoped to gain new perspectives on all sorts of matters. In our reading this morning, the reference to the Ganges River, where her questioning and listening led to a complete shift in perspective, offers a case in point. It's possible to start a revolution through dynamic listening. Now, in Peavy's example, she literally heard the shift from "the river is polluted, there is nothing I can do," to "we're not taking care of the river the way we're supposed to be taking care of the river. And no, we are not preparing our young people to clean up the river." I wonder how Fran Peavy, who died, by the way, 8 years ago, would address the issue of climate change today. You know, I have yet to hear the formation of a truly strategic question regarding the perils that we face as a planet. What's the question? Now, we have an abundance of pronouncements, from wildfires and droughts getting worse with each passing year. We know the tipping point of utter ruin, that temperature of the earth that we cannot go beyond, and yet we will. In similar ways, just as people in India did not take care of the Ganges River, we do not take care of our earth and rivers and oceans and air and forests. Climate change, despite all the scientists screaming at us, climate change remains an abstraction that avoids addressing our responsibility in making this mess. We act as though the earth is to blame for all its destruction caused by rising oceans and the intensity of hurricanes and the frequency of droughts. How then do we get to "we are not taking care of the earth the way we're supposed to take care of it"? In other words, how does change happen? Are we preparing our children to, end dependency on fossil fuels? What is the cultural wiring around climate change? Unitarian Universalists especially like to claim, "I see the problem, but others don't." This doesn't go very far, does it? Our children are deluged with facts. Okay, so how does change happen? Albert Einstein once said, "If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I knew the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes." Well, for Einstein, as well as for Fran Peavy, the question would have to be most strategic, especially if our life depended on it. But we would also need to know how to listen, be willing to listen, to detect how to make the change that could bring on a revolution. Now, if we are honest, we would concede that listening is not one of our fortes. So how will anything ever change? Dynamic listening escapes our repertoire so that even desperate cries of anguish, the cries among our global neighbors, fail to penetrate our awareness. If Hillary Clinton, for example, had only listened, that climate change has pushed mass migration around the world to the brink, from Syria to Africa, to Southeast Asia, to Central America, then she would not have tried to solve the problem just last week with such indifference to the suffering of immigrants, advising European nations to close their borders, they can't do this, they might do that, just, mainly so negative. She never once posed a question. Her strategic question might have been similar to the question asked by Jesus: if you greet only your brothers, well, how are you different from anyone else? Can you imagine if Jesus had Twitter back in the day? Wow. Just seeing this across the Twitter feed. If you greet only your brothers, how are you different from anyone else? That would be a good question. Or, what good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul? Or as Jesus asked his disciples, are you asleep? In dark and precarious times, in times when the center does not hold, there is a mystery that stirs within the human heart, filling us somehow, despite everything, filling us with a degree of expectation, anticipation, that maybe the big problems and issues of the day can be resolved. Well, there's always the possibility. And Advent reminds us that before the guy with strategic questions was born in the stable, there was an air of expectancy, because times then were simply intolerable. The level of inhumanity towards those who had so little grew to the point where, unless we finally understood our responsibility in making this mess, civilization would just implode. But humankind seldom surrenders. Instead, it anticipates a revolution where one day a whole new perspective can shape our lives, and it'll all be so different. On this first Sunday of Advent, I invite all of us to check in with our urgent sense of anticipation. What are we hoping will change? Do we ever take, and we know how bad it is, we know the litany, but do we ever take the time to say, okay, what do we hope will change? And when we take the time, my God, we can just taste it. As our own King Herod finally shows signs of coming undone, are not our hearts filled with expectancy? It's simply amazing that as we sit here well into the 21st century with keen intellects and sharp minds and antipathy towards anything superstitious, the story of Christmas and the logic of Advent still come across as so remarkably relevant. The problems of greed, self-preoccupation, offering no hospitality, war, poverty, injustice. Now, these are the same issues that have always visited humankind. And the funny thing is that, then as well as now, we use the same metaphors to describe our hopes, our anticipation, our expectations. We always talk about darkness and light. Darkness and light. Those contrasts have never left our imagination. And throughout the ages, we are filled with expectation that a light comprised of love, compassion, justice, equity will someday ultimately dissipate the darkness. How well do we listen? How well have we ever listened? Because it's all right there. For example, in one of my favorite parables, the parable of the rich fool. The ground of a certain rich man yielded simply an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store all these new crops. And then he said, got it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tear down my barn and build a bigger one. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I will say to myself, oh, you've got plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. The intractable resistance to share. It never even occurred to this guy, this abundance that he had. Our resistance to share with those in need reminds me of a very polluted Ganges River. Nobody was willing to touch it, although everyone knew there was a problem. The river just wasn't sustainable any longer. Well, neither is our indifference to the needs of the poor and the injustice that permeates our culture, especially among people of color. It makes you wonder what the cultural wiring is around excessive accumulation. Hey, we still build bigger barns, do we not? We build bigger barns to house our personal wealth rather than redistribute. And what a dirty word that has become. Rather than redistribute wealth more fairly. No, we're building bigger barns for our excess. We don't share well with others. Love and compassion were placed on the table 2,000 years ago, but there was no dynamic listening. We didn't love our neighbor then, and today we fire tear gas at the mothers and children who seek relief from hunger and violence. We tear about 2,000 children away from their parents because the hate is that strong, as it is against all who do not resemble us. But these are difficult images to reconcile during a season dedicated to celebrating the Prince of Peace, the one who made radical love the very fulcrum of the revolution. He was the change agent people have been hoping for. But there's always been anticipation. People waiting for change, waiting for the right question, for people to see their own complicity in neglecting the obvious dysfunction of society. Now, 400 years before Jesus, there was Socrates trying to awaken people from their ignorance with an entirely new perspective. He tried to propel people on a journey of thought, believing that truth will ultimately be disclosed through the perseverance of questioning. If Socrates had the vocabulary, he would have said strategic questioning. Determine the proper question, and the solution to the problem will come more easily. That's always been the case. And then 100 years before Socrates was the Buddha, who, by the way, could have written the parable of the rich fool long before Jesus, because the Buddha saw what happens. He understood the devastation in lusting for an accumulation of things, our wants, our desires, lead only to our suffering. Anybody listening? And 50 years before Buddha, we find Confucius telling people how it is. It couldn't get any simpler, really. Confucius divided the world between superior man, who is concerned with justice, and inferior man, who's concerned with profit. I heard rumors that he had thought of using the word deplorables instead, but he used inferior man instead. What's so astounding, if you've been counting the years with me, 550 years before Jesus, the same issues stand before us, namely sacrificing the needs of the poor for the benefit of our profit and more profit, so much so that we continue to build bigger and bigger and bigger barns to hold all that we have accumulated. Confucius explains the superior man is dignified without arrogance. The inferior man is arrogant without dignity. Well, does that apply to the White House today? Arrogance without dignity. Unitarian Universalists have assembled 7 principles by which to live. Confucius only needed 3. 1. Obey the moral obligation to live in harmony with everything around you. Are we willing to listen? 2. Display benevolence to others. Anybody listening? Strive for knowledge to understand the world around you. That's pretty important. I mean, do we understand how migration has affected the entire world and why? I mean, hearing the cries of injustice and pain and anguish leads to understanding. Wisdom, is it so profound? Wisdom makes us compassionate, says Confucius. Once we understand, once we get it, once we have the knowledge, once we have the wisdom, then we will become compassionate. We are indifferent to our neighbor because of our ignorance. We are not compassionate because we don't have the knowledge. Advent, for me, means the beginning of a season dedicated to listening. Listening like Fran Peavy. Dynamic listening. Hearing a new perspective. Hearing a response to the strategic questions posed throughout the ages. And the turning point, if there is to be a revolution or a transformation, the turning point is when we realize that we are responsible for the mess we are in. Now, the solution will take a long time. But if we understand that, well, we will go about the business of preparing our young people as well. Come to think of it, what are we communicating to young people right now? Imagine if we did not have Advent. Would we ever stop long enough to ask, do I have any expectations that someday light may break forth and just shatter the darkness? You know, Advent invites me to kind of stop for a moment and ask, what kind of change am I waiting for? Do I anticipate that one day long from now, there will be peace throughout the world, justice for all, and the earth held sacred by every person? Can can I start to imagine that? My God, and then there's the message of Christmas itself. And all the distractions that Christmas provides so that we don't really have to think about the world's misery. We ought to find a moment and sit down on a park bench, holding a sign, I am willing to listen. Oh, it may lead to a revolution. And that's what Christmas is really all about, the revolution. Can we close our service, turning our hymn books, please, to number 187. As we extinguish the chalice, may we close with these brief words by a dear colleague of mine, Mark Morrison Reed. He reminds us that the central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amidst the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice on behalf of everyone.